Ringo Starr spent his whole life smiling for everyone. But behind that big smile was a guy who had deep hurts he never really talked about much. For many years, he kept a secret anger inside toward one person who used to feel like family to him. Someone whose decisions hurt him worse than any mean thing the newspapers ever said. The guy everyone knew for being peaceful, funny, and chill finally said out loud that one name bothered him more than anybody else. And when you find out who it is, the whole story will make you look at Ringo in a totally new way. The insecurity that came with him into the Beatles. Ringo Starr was born Richard Starkey in Liverpool during the war, a kid whose early life was full of sickness instead of music. When he was 6, a bad illness called peritonitis almost killed him and kept him out of school for over a year. At 13, tuberculosis put him in a special hospital for 2 whole years, making him very quiet, shy, and way behind the other kids in school stuff. Those missing years created the unsure feeling that stayed with him when he grew up. He always felt like other people were smarter, tougher, and better at things. What helped him was a little drum the nurses gave him. It started as something to play with, turned into a dream, and later became his way to survive. By the early 1960s, the Beatles had lots of wild energy, but needed a solid beat to make their music bigger than just Liverpool bars. Ringo was calm, dependable, and already well-liked in his band Rory Storm and the Hurricanes. When the Beatles' producer at EMI said he wasn't happy with Pete Best, the choice was clear. On August 16, 1962, Ringo Starr became the last member to join the Beatles. Fans loved him right away, but the music business didn't. Newspaper headlines called him the luckiest drummer ever. Critics laughed and said he could only keep basic time, and papers called him the least talented Beatle before he even got to show what he could do. What hurt worse was how much Ringo noticed the ranking inside the group. John Lennon and Paul McCartney were like the kings of writing songs. George Harrison was the smart one always pushing for more room. And Ringo, the new guy, the replacement, the drummer with not much history, often felt like his job was just to smile, keep the beat steady, sing a fun, silly song, and not get in the way. Even the big moment that should have felt great, playing on Love Me Do, turned awful when producer George Martin hired another drummer named Andy White because he didn't trust Ringo enough yet. Years later, Ringo said the hurt from that stayed with him. I made him apologize every day. The message was obvious from the beginning. They needed him, but they didn't really respect him. And that unsure feeling became the reason a bigger hurt later felt so much worse than it should have. The slow, quiet burn from George Harrison's silence. Of all the people who hurt Ringo Starr, the one from George Harrison was the most surprising. George wasn't noisy, mean, or in your face. He never made fun of Ringo in front of others or put him down while recording. Instead, the hurt came from growing distance. Quiet, sharp distance that got bigger every year until the friendship Ringo counted on most felt empty and gone. In the early Beatles days, Ringo depended on George more than anyone. George knew exactly how it felt to be in the shadow of John and Paul. He knew what it was like to fight for attention, respect, and a chance to shine. That connection made George the closest friend Ringo had in the band. But as the late 1960s went on, little cracks started showing. George started working more with people outside the band. Eric Clapton, Billy Preston, Bob Dylan, the same guys who later helped with the big concert for Bangladesh in 1971. Ringo just watched quietly as George made amazing, deep music with everyone but him. It wasn't about being jealous. It was the feeling of being left out and forgotten by the person he always stood next to. The worst time happened in 1968, while recording While My Guitar Gently Weeps. Instead of asking his own bandmate, George brought in Eric Clapton to play the famous guitar solo. It wasn't just about the music. It felt like a clear message to Ringo. He could be replaced even in the Beatles. Years later, Ringo quietly told a friend with anger, "Turns out I'm not the only one in the band who could be left behind." After the Beatles split in 1970, the distance hurt even more. George jumped into new records, new friends, new ideas. Ringo was trying hard to build his own solo career and felt their friendship fading month after month. In one meetup, he said, half joking to George, "You've got the whole world to work with except me." George just gave a polite smile and didn't say why. That quiet no answer hurt Ringo more than any loud fight or rude comment ever could. He never really talked about it openly. With John and Paul, arguments were big and easy to see. But with George, the hurt was silent, and that's why it stuck forever. John Lennon's big change and the broken friendship. Ringo always looked up to John Lennon's. Even when the Beatles were falling apart from big egos, different ideas, and being tired, Ringo was drawn to John's quick humor, bravery, and natural way of leading. Standing behind John on stage felt like being behind something powerful and unstoppable. But nothing got Ringo ready for what started in late 1968 when John and Yoko Ono became super close. Not just boyfriend and girlfriend, but like one team that slowly pushed everyone else aside. At first, Ringo was okay with Yoko being around. He thought of her as a real artist and figured she'd only be there a little. But soon she started jumping into choices that used to be just for the four Beatles. In one weird recording session, Yoko suddenly gave her opinion about Ringo's drumming. Back then, John would have laughed, stuck up for his friend, or made it funny. But this time he looked at Ringo sharply and said in a cold voice, "Just keep it even, that's enough." The whole room went quiet. For Ringo, it hurt way more than just fixing a mistake. It showed him John no longer thought of him as an equal in the band. Now Yoko's words mattered more than his. That change got stronger as John pulled away from the Beatles in every way: feelings, spirit, and music. Ringo told a friend they used to be a real band, but now with John it was just him and Yoko. The final straw came when John yelled angrily at George Harrison just for asking about Yoko being involved. Ringo saw it all happen: a table slammed, loud voices, and a look from John saying he'd protect his partner no matter what, even if it wrecked the band. He had never seen John act so different and lost. The sadness Ringo felt wasn't from being mad. It came from losing someone. He lost more than a bandmate. He lost a leader he really trusted. Years later, when Ringo went to see John in New York in 1980, the old friendly feeling came back for a short time. Then just weeks after, John was gone forever. The hurt never got time to get better. Silence was how their story ended. Paul McCartney, the friend who turned into a bossy studio ruler. Of all the hard times Ringo Starr went through in the Beatles, nothing hurt as much or as many times as the stuff with Paul McCartney. Paul was super smart, never stopped working and full of drive, but his need to make everything perfect often hurt the people around him. After their manager Brian Epstein died in 1967, the band lost the one who kept things steady, and Paul took over leading. What was supposed to hold the Beatles together ended up helping break them apart, and Ringo felt it the hardest. In the studio, Paul's rules got tougher, his requests sharper. He wrote songs non-stop, planned every detail, and controlled everything, even the singing parts and little drum bits. For Ringo, who already felt like the least good one, Paul's bossy side made him quietly scared that nobody needed him at all. The big moment came while making the White Album in 1968. Paul got annoyed with a basic drum part and made Ringo play it over and over, asking for tiny changes each time. Then, without thinking twice, Paul sat at the drums himself to show how he wanted it done. For Ringo, it felt exactly like the Bad Love Me Do day 6 years before when they brought in Andy White because they didn't trust him. But this time, something broke inside him. Ringo got up, walked to the door, and said with hurt, "You clearly don't need a drummer anymore." Then he left the studio and stayed away for 2 full weeks. The other three Beatles were shocked. They sent flowers. They said sorry. They asked him to come back. But Ringo being gone showed everyone something they couldn't pretend away anymore. Paul's leading had turned into controlling everything like a boss. Even after Ringo came back, the hurt never really went away. Every time he sat at his drums, part of him remembered when Paul took his place. Funny thing, years later, Paul ended up being Ringo's closest connection left from the Beatles, even putting him in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2015. Their friendship got nicer over time, but Ringo never forgot what it felt like to be treated like something easy to swap out in the group he helped create. And still, even Paul wasn't the one Ringo felt most angry at. The people outside who made Ringo's anger worse. While the hurts from inside the Beatles cut the deepest, some people from outside left their own little marks on Ringo Starr. Some acted too proud, some brought mess, and some just showed everything he hated about the music business. These moments didn't leave the same forever scars like the ones from John, Paul, or George, but they added to the quiet anger that built up in Ringo's heart. Jim Morrison from The Doors was one of them. To people in America, Morrison seemed like a mysterious poet, a dark rebel, a big rock star living wild. But to Ringo, he looked like someone acting out his own ruin and calling it art. Morrison would show up drunk on stage, forget words, yell nonsense, and fall apart. Ringo, who fought sickness as a kid and worked so hard to get where he was, hated seeing someone waste everything like that. Morrison doesn't perform music, he said quietly once to himself. He performs his downfall. And what upset Ringo even more was how much everyone loved it and cheered for it. Then there was Peter Sellers, who Ringo worked with on the movie Magic Christian in 1969. Sellers was a famous, funny man. But on set he acted like a king. He wanted the script changed, made scenes all about him, and treated other actors like they didn't matter. When Ringo politely suggested a tiny change to make a scene feel more real, Sellers shut him down cold. "You stick to your drums and I'll take care of the movies." It sounded just like every mean joke Ringo ever heard. The laughs about being the worst Beatle, the headlines making fun of his drumming. Sellers became like every closed door Ringo ever faced. Mick Jagger was another annoyance. Loud, showy, and wild, Jagger made every show like big theater drama. Ringo liked the Rolling Stones, but he didn't like what he saw as too much acting and showing off. "We write music," he grumbled once. "They dance to it." Jagger was everything about rock stars being full of themselves that Ringo couldn't stand. And then Keith Moon from The Who, a friend but a tiring one. Ringo thought Moon was really good at drums, but being around him was hard. Moon's crazy actions, like breaking hotel rooms or doing dangerous stuff, pulled Ringo into messes he never asked for. "When I went out with Keith," he said later, "I never knew if I'd come home alive." But even with all those annoyances, none of those guys were the person Ringo really hated the most. That spot went to someone else. Someone from inside the Beatles, someone he trusted, someone whose hurt still followed him many years later. The one man Ringo Starr truly hated more than anyone. After all the pain from John's change, Paul's bossiness, George's quiet distance, and the outsiders who bugged him, there was only one person Ringo said he could never really forgive. Not because of pride or music fights, but because this guy quietly worked to break apart the only family Ringo ever felt he truly had. That man was Alan Klein's. After Brian Epstein died in 1967, the Beatles felt lost like a boat with no driver. Money was going missing. Their company Apple was a mess, and every choice turned into an argument. In that weak moment, Alan Klein showed up, smooth talker, pushy, saying he could fix it all. John liked him first. George went along. Ringo, tired and wanting things calm again, signed with him in 1969. He said later Klein was a hustler, and I felt it was time I had someone hustling for me. But behind the nice words, Klein was looking at every weak spot in the band. He saw Paul's need to be in charge, John's wild side, George's anger, and Ringo's wish for peace, and he used every one of them. All of a sudden, every meeting felt like 3 against 1, with Klein making the split bigger. When Paul said no to signing Klein's deal, Klein pushed the other 3 to go ahead without him. It ended badly. Court fights, blame, and the Beatles finally breaking up in 1970. Only later did Ringo see what really happened. Klein messed up the money, twisted contracts, and used the band's problems to get what he wanted. By 1973, he got fired and people were looking into him. Ringo, who once believed in him, felt awful with regret. The guy he thought would save the Beatles had actually torn them apart. Years later, a sad thing George Harrison said came out through someone else. The only way the Beatles can ever get together again is if Alan isn't there. I'm ready. So is Ringo. But it was too late. Well, the hurt couldn't be fixed. For Ringo, Klein wasn't just a bad manager. He stood for the worst kind of betrayal. An outsider who took advantage when they were weakest. The person who broke up the best music friendship of all time. And unlike the others, that hurt never got softer as time went by. Now that you know the whole story, who do you think hurt Ringo the most? George, Paul, John, or Alan Klein? Tell me in the comments. And if you want more hidden stories about music stars, make sure to like the video and subscribe for the next one.